On this episode of the Maverick Paradox podcast, I'm joined by Jared Rosenthal, the unconventional entrepreneur behind the viral Who's Your Daddy DNA testing truck. We talk about breaking free from corporate life, building a business from an RV, and navigating the fragile shift from industry credibility to entrepreneurial invisibility. It's a raw, real look at what it takes to bet on yourself and keep going when the status disappears. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, the show for business owners, organizational leaders, and the pathologically curious. I'm Judith Germain, a maverick leadership expert exploring what it really takes to lead in a world that doesn't always make sense. If you're ready to think differently, challenge the status quo, navigate complexity, and drive real impact, you're in the right place.
I will say that there's an example of something that if I had to present that to a board meeting, I'd be outvoted 10-20. Even my own office outvoted me. But I said, screw it, I'm gonna do it. So I, had some friends that painted, like graffiti artists, and had them do it, and boom, it was like instant.
And today our guest is Jared Rosenthal. How are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Do you have like a favorite genre of music? Is there this type of music that gets you going?
Music, I have a pretty eclectic taste, but I really do like old school hip hop and R&B. I love reggaeton, and my all-time favorite is Bruce Springsteen. So all over the place.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting that you've such interests everywhere.
Yeah, well, I love to listen to music when I'm working out, and really, you can't work out without it, right? It's a completely different workout if you have no music.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. All right, then, so tell us a bit more about you.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Health Street, and I started it in 2010. I had been in corporate America for, actually a nonprofit for about 10 years, and then a very corporate for-profit for a few years, and before I started my own business. And I always really wanted to be on my own. When I was a kid, I was always starting little businesses, even as young as like 10 years old. And kind of got away from it because I thought I really wanted to learn, the corporate world. And I think I really did. I really understood it, the good, the bad, the ugly. But not a day went by during all that time where I wasn't thinking, man, if I could just do this on my own, I would just, be so much happier. And so that's what I did.
Oh, so was there anything that made you want to do it on your own?
When you own your own business, it's more than what maybe meets the eye. I think you own your own life in a different way, right? So when I worked in big companies, you would wake up thinking about your boss or what, someone in another department was going to think about what you were saying, or you would have to, convince all kinds of other people of things, rather than just implementing your own ideas and concepts. And, it's a completely different life when you're on your own because obviously there's no boss, and, the risk is much higher, but I have the ability to, filter that out a little bit, I guess, maybe better than some. And, and the consequences are your own. So like if you have an idea, maybe it's a bad one, and, that's okay because you're learning and you're living and you're experiencing it. But, and the good ones hit, and they're, the highs are higher and maybe the lows are lower, but I really do love it.
Brilliant. I think that's great. So you used to be a healthcare CEO,
Right.
and then you gave that up to create Health Street. Tell me about that.
Well, Health Street was a way of doing it, so when I was in healthcare, I was in an insurance company, right? And it was, one of those things where to start that on my own, I had this desire to be an entrepreneur, but that's one of those things where you need, tons of reserves, right? So you can't just go out unless you got tens of millions of dollars, right? You need insurance commissioner approval, and you need reserves and years of prep and all that stuff. And, I don't like bureaucracy. I don't want to, spend a lot of time doing those things. And what I did was something much, much simpler of business with very low, much lower barriers to entry, which was I bought a used RV. and I thought we could do mobile drug testing. So, we would like drive up to big companies or factories or whatever where they had to test 100 people, 200 people. And because of, the reason for the RV is because has a bathroom, for the urine collections. So that was the idea, and I was hoping to like grow it and expand it across the country by multiplying the RVs. But as it turned out, it was much more effective to do it through a call center and build a network of clinics. So we become the central body that the companies call to, or do we do a ton of it online, and they just register online and set up the test through our network nationwide. So rather than myself going out and doing the collections or training people to actually do the collections, it became more of a tech platform for companies to do the same.
Okay, so that's a really good illustration of what you were saying earlier about doing something that doesn't quite work, take that learning and to pivot into something else.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and maybe in a corporate environment, I wouldn't have had that opportunity, and or by the time you get done trying to sell your ideas to a board or a committee or whatever, maybe it doesn't come out the same way. And sometimes that might be better to do it that way. They always say more smart people. I used to say when I was in corporation, put more smart people in the room can only help, right? And so I don't have that. But I'll just tell you from experience, it doesn't always help. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
just slows the process down.
So tell me about how that ended up being the Who's Your Daddy truck.
Okay, well, who's your dad? So initially, I painted the urine collection motif on the side of the truck, and as you can imagine, people made fun of it. They saw they saw the urine cup on the side, and people would complain, don't park that in front of my house and stuff. So we were getting a lot of questions about DNA. We were offering DNA testing, and it just occurred to me that maybe that's a better thing to put out there because we're out in the street, and maybe people see it and they'll call and kind of had this like a joke around the office, like about DNA. Who's your daddy? Something about DNA. It always kind of goes to that humor element. Even though it's dead serious kind of stuff. Even the people that are involved in it. It's kind of like I don't know what it is about DNA testing, but it always is like a little comical. So we said, hey, who's your daddy? Let's paint it on the side of the truck. I will say that there's an example of something that if I had to present that to a board meeting, I'd be outvoted 10-1. Even my own office outvoted me, like I think it was like 8 people at the time, 8-1. But I said, screw it, I'm gonna do it. So I, had some friends that painted, like graffiti artists, that became like professional graffiti artists and had them do it, and boom, it was like instant. As soon as I drove away, people were like honking and waving, and I remember first time I was driving, this woman told me it's the best thing she ever saw. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that good, but people loved it. They would people would run into their house to get their camera, all kinds of crazy stuff, and then we got in the press, and once the press came, there was an article in the New York Post, and that same day by 9 o'clock, I was on the phone with ABC, CBS, NBC, went all the way until 10 o'clock that night on, I don't know, 20 different stations. They were coming out to interview me, and it's just wild. It's just like it just hit all at once. So but it's, again, simple idea, and just had obviously I didn't know that would happen, right? I just thought it was a good way to market the business. But really probably never could have done that in a corporate environment.
Hmm. Yeah, it would have seemed counterintuitive. So was the press attention that you got, the media attention, what helped turn that idea into a reality show?
Yes. So right after we were in all those stations, starting the next day, I think I stopped counting, around 30 different production companies, a couple of networks were all calling, and they wanted to make an unscripted show, reality show, about the business and about the truck and the people that we go out and talk to, because we were doing mobile DNA as well. So, I think there's these producers, have sort of a model in their head of what makes a good, 30-minute show, and, drama and, authenticity, and of course a reveal at the end where it kind of wraps it up. And it's had all the elements, and I think all of them kind of just like saw it at the same time, and said, "Oh man, we gotta do this."
So what kind of year was that in?
Well, the article came out in 2012, and we filmed the sizzle reel, I think in 2013, and then we got greenlit and did the season in 2014, and then it went on the air the next year, 2015. So it took a few years.
Okay. Do you think that that would have happened like now? Do you think it was the time? Because isn't that around about the time of Springer and all those personality
Yeah,
type test TV series? I'm just wondering if it
right.
would have happened so quickly now.
Well, I think a few, it's a really great point. I think a few major things, right? One, everyone at that time, if you remember Singer and Springer and Maury, right? Everybody thought that
Mm.
that's what DNA testing was. And what I was seeing was that it really wasn't. It was really heartfelt. There was a lot of tears. We brought together long lost siblings at times that never met because the father maybe, who knows? It was all different crazy stories. Maybe had two families or never knew they had another kid. And then some, really terrible ones where, mostly I saw dads that loved their kid and sometimes found out that it really wasn't their kid. And it wasn't hooting and hollering, it was crying, right? And so I
Mm.
was telling those stories. And what was really interesting, what I was really afraid of is that these producers were going to try and turn my business into another kind of Maury Povich show. And so what I did, luckily, had enough leverage because they all kind of wanted it. So was able to negotiate to say, I want to be able to approve, have veto power over the footage before it gets to the network. And so that's what I did. And I was able to get that, you get a title, which is executive producer, which doesn't really mean anything, just that I had that right. And so I was really happy to be able to pull it off because the show was something that was heartfelt. It wasn't exploitative. That's what I was really afraid of. I didn't want them to exploit the clients, right? And then the other thing about the timing, right? I remember, let's say, so it's 2012, and this is August, which was a presidential election year, right? And just to
Yeah.
show you how different things are, I was on CNN talking about the truck for I think it was like a 6-minute segment in August of a presidential election. Would never happen today. I mean, you couldn't do it in an off year, let alone the throes of all they talk about is politics. So just times were definitely different. Not sure if it would take off today, but that's that. It was a place and time for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I suppose the consequences weren't that thought through. It's a bit like when you watch the old like police shows and they talk about and you sit there and you think, why don't you just do a DNA? Why don't you just and like they didn't exist then. Or or if it did exist, it was really, really basic. And we kind of forget
Yeah.
how technology has moved forwards in such a short period of time.
Yeah, and the awareness, right? Like I remember a bus driver he stopped me, honked. I pulled over. He literally got out of a bus full of people to say because he saw me driving a truck and he said, I might have a kid in somewhere in the Caribbean, I forget. And I got to get this test done. I said, how old's the kid? He said 20. I said, so you've known about this for 20 years and seeing the truck is what made you stop everything, right? In the middle of your job. Like that was amazing to me. So I think it was like maybe back then there was less awareness. People knew, right? They had Maury and stuff. Um, but maybe it just wasn't as easy to talk about or think about or access. There wasn't as much online stuff so at the time, having the truck out, it was like, okay, I can do this. I see it's real. It's in black and white in front of me. And maybe it wouldn't have that same resonance now because people are just accustomed to Googling everything.
Yeah, it's probably not the same, but it's a bit like when I first watched the Tombs episode on X-Files. I couldn't sleep for that 3 days or something. And then I recently rewatched it and I was like, man, this is so not scary. It was just like, what was scary about? But then what's missing, apart from the age, is that in between that time, you've seen more and more and more scary things. So it has a less of an impact, and it's a bit like the DNA, whereas now people will be thinking, I don't know, what if the company goes bankrupt? What will they do with the data? Who actually has all this? Those are kind of questions that people wouldn't have asked back in the days because it wasn't something you'd thought about. So how,
Right, right.
so you kind of broke loose from corporate. Is there like a do you have like a guide or a way that other people can do the same?
Well, I have some lessons learned, maybe, and some advice
Yeah.
for sure, you know. I think, you know, the way I did it, um, was with, you know, so there's various methods, right? And the one that people think of the most is, you know, you pitch the idea to VCs and try to get funding, and those are usually, you know, brand new ideas with high, you know, investment required, right? And a lot of your job is then to pitch, right? I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to be my own boss. I thought that was, you know, the most important part of it. But I had to find something that I could afford. So you know, I found this and I went out and took a couple of, you know, courses to be trained become be trained to be a trainer, right? So I can train my own staff to do the drug collections and the breath alcohol testing. And, you know, that was relatively inexpensive. Used RV was relatively inexpensive. And it was just a matter of how do I get business to start the, you know, the revenue flow. I think so the model that you choose is critical to that first step. Do you want to have investors, partners, or, you know, borrow money, or do you want to try and find something that's very you know, that has a low barrier to entry that you could, you know, maybe do more of yourself. But context and I should say structure, the structure that you choose in many ways becomes your destiny, because so many things are, you know, rely on that structure. So if you do what I did, you know, just be on your own, well, in terms of growth, you're a little bit restrained then because you can only you can only reinvest the money that you're making, right? You can't operate on a loss for a decade like many of these VC funded companies are. You have to, you know, and then sometimes your personal needs compete, you know, like maybe you want to take the profit and, you know, buy a car or something like that. You know, you have to think, well, do I need this money to invest in Google ads, right? So you're getting that funny thing where your personal priorities sometimes compete with your business priorities, and you have to be able to balance that. I also did something, you know, my you know, the lesson I would say from what I did was I did everything myself and then tried to teach others to do it. And not everybody wants to do that. Like I was a CEO of a healthcare company. There was, you know, 90% of the stuff I didn't do. I didn't even know how to do, right? Because we had 150 people that were doing it. My job was to lead and run meetings and represent us with the government agencies and so on and so forth, right? Hospitals and such. Here I said, I want to do everything because first of all, I don't have the money to pay anybody to do it. And then I will know it. And so that when I start to hire people for it, I'll know what their job is. So it's very you know, when you're running from a corporate role, you don't have to know everything. And if you know, let's just make up a job, the lead, you know, phone guy that runs your phone system quits, right? It's not that scary in a corporation because you find somebody else to do it and there's money and there's, you know, there's a network. Uh, if you're hire somebody in your own business that is the only one that knows what's going on in your business, often it's very custom stuff, and it becomes a lot more fragile because if they walk away, then you really have a problem because maybe your whole business is relying on that, right? And it's a lot more stressful. So my thought was learn everything, do everything, and then you don't want to do that forever. You want to then pass it down. So then you get in that cycle of then, okay, I'm ready to move on. I know what this is. Let me hire someone else to do it. But you got to give up that pride of saying I'm sitting in the corner office and, you know, all the other people are doing the grunt work because you got to do the grunt work.
Yeah, and how was the transition? Because there is something about being a senior leader in an organization where you have people that do stuff for you and you're well known in the industry because of the position that you have, and then you leave and you set up on your own. Nobody knows about you. All your
Yep.
contacts that you had before aren't interested
Yep.
because you're in that position. So, you know, it can be very difficult to make that transition. How did you do it?
Well, what you just said, I didn't know, right? I didn't know that all the people that used to take my call just because I left my CEO role, all of a sudden didn't really want to talk to me. Not all of them, but
Yeah.
I would say a lot of them that, you know, you just knew through business. It was almost like a taboo. Wow. You know, they would say nobody leaves I was a senior vice president for marketing at this national company, along with, you know, in that same company that I was a CEO. and I was the CEO of a subsidiary, I should say. So it was a national company, and I ran Illinois, right? But I also ran the national marketing and sales. And people say, why would you leave that job? Nobody leaves that job. So it was almost like a taboo, and I didn't expect that, right? So that was a little, that was a little alarming. And it was like, all right. And then people didn't respond to me in the same way. And even when I first hired people, it was a different, um, how to say, like they didn't look at me in the same way when I was running this company, where maybe there was levels between you and the staff, middle management, and people just kind of gave you respect and that sort of thing. And now it's like, okay, I'm hiring the three people in the call center. They work directly for me, and it's a very different, and like I said, also more fragile setup.
Yeah, I guess what it is, I think, is in organizations, people rely on positional authority almost more than anything else. So if that's how someone is used to influencing people, when you don't have positional authority, it can be quite different. And I
Yeah,
suppose, yeah, go on.
No, I was phrasing it in a slightly different way. Is when people look, you say, well, the company made this person the CEO, so it's like a social proof, right? That you must be good, right? And whereas now I'm sitting across from somebody, and they look at me and they go, "This guy just started. I could do that too." So it's
Yeah.
not the same kind of social proof. It's like, oh, this guy just decided to buy a truck.
Yeah, there's a status thing in it, right?
Yep.
For sure. All right then. So before we finish for today, is there anything that you would want to share or leave with the audience?
Well, I think that one thing I think is important for me, uh, now that I've, gotten past those phases of it, right, and established a business and got back to that comfort of being in a position that of something that I really want to be doing, right. I just want to share it with other people because I think it's really hard, right, and
Mm.
there's so many steps along the way where you could give up. You could give up before you begin, right? Because you just don't see that you don't maybe don't have the confidence in it. But I think a lot of people never had an example or somebody that they could see in life that actually did it, that could tell them that they could do it, right? And so I think that there's definitely certain character traits that you got to have, risk tolerance, and you have to have a passion for business, right? Not just, let's say you're really good at, baking cakes. You can't just do that, right? You have to also care about business, right? Because those things will come up very fast. But if you have those traits, I think it's important to find models of people that have done this, not the specific business you're doing, but you know, tempted to start something on their own and understand, that it is really challenging. But if you are relentlessly working at it and believe in yourself, that you do have the chance to really make a different kind of life for yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jared.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's conversation. You can't lead what you don't influence. The Influence Blueprint reveals how your leadership is really landing and what's silently undermining your impact. Whether you're a leader ready to level up or an HR director tired of investing in development that doesn't stick, this is where influence gets real. Find out more at maverickparadox.co.uk/influence-blueprint.